Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss at Internet Shitlords, and as you can see here, I've got, well, let me just move that over there so you can see the cover better. I got Baptism of Fire, which is one of my biggest games, and there's Star Adventure, which is my shortest game, and in the middle there you got the Old School Companion 2, which has a collection of, I think it's 26 different medieval authentic adventures that you can use in any OSR type RPG. Though especially good, obviously, if you play Lion and Dragon. And just in case anyone hasn't heard already, Baptism of Fire is still #1 in the OSR list for drive-through, and it is now a gold bestseller, which is very fast to reach gold bestseller. I'm very, very pleased about that, and thank you to everybody who's purchased it. If you did purchase Baptism of Fire from drive-through, then if you wouldn't mind, go back to the page and give it a rating, or even if possible a short review, just saying what you thought about it, and that would be really appreciated. So okay, I've been waiting the last few days to see if there was any news in the RPG world, and for quite a while there wasn't, and now suddenly there was 2 different things I wanted to do a video about. But I am going to start, and this will be the first one. I guess I'll do the next one in a couple of days. But obviously the most significant news in a way is that in D&D Wizards YouTube channel they did an ad, you could say, talking about what's going to be in the new onednd Player's Handbook, and it's not good, folks. So that's a spoiler in a way, but I don't think anybody watching my channel is going to be very surprised with that. So I had predicted that most of the changes were going to be cosmetic, that they would add a few things that they already had from some of the questionable source books that they put out, but that most of the change was actually going to be, about peripheral stuff, like changing alignment, getting rid of race, because that apparently, in their minds, playing a race is somehow problematic, and stuff like that, beholders are good guys now, or whatever, sword drow, so is everything else. Demons can be good, everything can be, everything, there is no actual good or evil in the game. But I was a little bit wrong, I'll admit, because they have, in fact, done some stuff with the rules, mostly in the form of addition, right? They've put in more things in there, and it's not in any way helpful, I suspect. My prediction is that essentially, well, they're actually making mistakes that I know for a fact when the original 5th edition was being written was something that was discarded because it was not going to be, because that would have been counterproductive to the goal, to the design goal of 5th edition. The problem is the people that are there now don't really understand those design goals, or they never agreed with them, one or the other, and they're going to mess it up. So basically, they're bragging about how this is the biggest player's handbook of all time. And I mean, big is okay, right? But as I demonstrate right here, you can have a really good game that's quite large, or a really good game that's quite small. It's not really about the size, it's about what you're trying to achieve, okay? And what they've decided to try to achieve with the new Player's Handbook is essentially to make it seem as though they're adding a whole bunch of extra value, but this is really actually going to be counterproductive. So first, to get to the basic stuff, it's very obvious from the preview that the book is going to have all of the kind of woke stuff that you would expect. If you look at some of the example art that they show in this preview, there's lots of powerful black women in there, which, as we know, are the largest demographic of D&D players. They're they're just overwhelming everybody else in the industry. There's, you can't run into a D&D group that doesn't have like 80% overweight black women as the main players, and they've got all of this kind of cutesy poo twee stuff that is meant to diminish the quality of the heroic concept. And they have, for those who had constantly been trying to claim that, the combat wheelchair isn't a thing, right? They literally show an art piece with a guy in a combat one. I think it was a guy. Nowadays, who knows, right? But a person in a combat wheelchair, breeding or non-breeding person or whatever the hell it is that they call it these days. So, it visually, it's going to be a huge mess. There are a lot of people saying that clearly some of that art looks to them like AI art. I don't know. I don't know if I can judge that or not. Wizards has been caught several times with art that is at least partly, if not wholly, AI produced. And obviously, I wouldn't say that's a problem, except that they constantly say that no, we support artists and we will never use AI art, and then they use AI art. So this is the thing. It's all very silly. And they're bragging that they have 48 subclasses in the game, right? Because this is going to be super useful. And so every subclass has their own special things, and then they've expanded. This is the really bad part here, is that they have expanded the rules to include new special powers that they're bragging about, and weapon mastery, which they think is the solution to the fact that one of the ever-present issues in D&D is that people think fighters are boring. And I mean, to a certain degree, one can argue that, but there are good ways and bad ways to fix it, right? And they're bragging about having more than 400 spells in the game. So let's start with that last one first. What does that mean? Their argument is, oh no, it'll give magic users a whole bunch of new options, right? But in fact, what 400 spells in the PHB means is that 200 of those spells will never be used by anyone. And 100 more will only rarely, if ever, be used by anyone. And of the last 100, there's going to be 30 to 50 that are absolute necessities in terms of effectiveness for a wizard character or for a magic using character, and everything else is going to be subsidiary to that. So all it is extra junk, basically. This has always been a problem with a lot of D&D editions, right? That they think that just piling on more stuff equals more opportunity. But here's what happens, right? And this is going to be the case with the spells. It's going to be the case with the weapon mastery. It's going to be the case with the extra special abilities and everything else, is that this is going to bloat the system. This is literal rules bloat that's going on here, or content bloat, I guess. And, they didn't talk very much about any of the core rules being changed, and they're still claiming that this has compatibility with 5e. And in one sense, I'm sure it does, but in another sense, what it also ends up doing is that this, if you're using the new rules, then you have a bunch of stuff that didn't appear in the old rules, and what it's mainly going to screw up is the fundamental concept of 5e. And this was the fundamental concept, right? Which we talked about a lot with Mike Merles when we were helping to make 5e, right? Which is that 5e was designed in a way that was contrary to how 3rd or 4th edition were designed. So in 3rd edition especially, but in 4th edition, who cares, right? Because it was a complete failure. But in 3rd edition and 3.5, obviously, which only made things worse, right? And in the long term, the game was intentionally designed for system mastery, And what that meant is that if you read all the rules, if you read every one of the spells, if you knew all of the feats, the more that you were obsessive about it, the more that you were a high intensity engager with the rules, the more advantage you would have in the game. You were going to be able to min-max and selectively, care-op, they called it, character optimization, where you knew that there were some feats that were complete trash and there were other feats that were better, and you could, if you were trained enough in this complex system, you would be able to map out a character. And I've literally saw people doing this from level 1 to level 20, with each level what feats they're going to take, which skills they're going to invest in, and all of it to maximize the potency of the character. And so what this did, obviously, is that the more of a D&D nerd you were, the more obsessive you were, and the more of a specific kind of D&D nerd, because there can be people that are really into D&D and play it all the time, but don't obsess over the rules. But in this case, the more of a rules lawyer you were, the better you were in the game, and the more advantage that gave you over all the other players. And 5th edition looked to do something different than that, because we realized that D&D in 3rd edition had failed to draw in a significant amount of casuals, right? Of casual players, which are in fact important. There's always a tendency in a lot of kind of geek hobbies, comic books, for instance, are another example, to sell to the fanatics, right? To sell to the people that are the most obsessed and give them what they want over and above everything else. And if you do that, it's kind of the opposite in a way of what a lot of geek stuff that is now controlled by the woke do, where they're intentionally trying to drive away the geeks. That's bad too, right? But in the case of trying to exclusively appeal to the biggest fanatics, what that does is it keeps out the casuals. And you don't want that, because there's a lot more casuals than there are fanatics, right? You want people who play D&D occasionally. You want people who read comics occasionally. You want people who want to be entertained and don't need to have read every previous issue of whatever, of X-Men, to know what's going on, right? And because otherwise you end up with an ever diminishing number of ever greater fanatics that ends up reducing your profitability. So with 5th edition, the goal, and I know that most of you who are watching this, because I know what my audience is like, are probably not people who are huge fans of 5e. I'm sure some of you have played it, but I'm guessing that none of you would see it as your number one game. But it's important to understand what made D&D 5th edition so successful, which apparently the people at Wizards now don't. And that was that the game was set up in such a way, the rules and the play and the let's say the balance, for lack of a better term, of the mechanics are such that a diehard rules-obsessed player will not have an incredibly significant advantage over someone who's never played before, or someone who just casually plays. And this was done intentionally to be able to draw in casual players and people who don't feel like they need to pick over every part of the feat section with a fine-toothed comb to figure out what's their ideal character optimization, regardless of what they might actually want to play, because they just want to have the guy with the most stuff. And inevitably, when you have 48 subclasses and you have a whole bunch of new powers and things, and then you have 400 new spells and you have weapon mastery, you screw everything up, I'm going to break from what I'm saying right now to make one amusing point. Is I very rarely go on the D&D Wizards channel, and in fact that's true in general, as I'm about to explain. I always get amused when I go there. Now obviously this video that they just put out, because it is like a first glance at the new PHB, has gotten a decent amount of views. I think it's gotten like 93,000 views or something like that when I checked it, which was about a day ago maybe. But the channel itself supposedly has it's getting close to 500,000 subscribers. And their typical videos, I mean, obviously they get more views than my typical video, but they only get, a lot of them only get like, 13,000 views, right? So it is actually a pretty bad ratio that Wizards has in terms of anybody being actually interested. And, that's, I just find that very, very funny, that they've, that they have such low volume in terms of compared to the number of alleged subscribers. Anyways, carrying on, the other thing about this that I think is a really good example of a bad idea is weapon mastery. Weapon mastery inevitably has to do with doing like special maneuvers with particular weapons, that you get more stuff as you go up in level, and it's very unlikely that these are going to all be relatively within the same range. There's going to be some stuff that's going to be way more useful than others, and there's going to be this big variety of options that will end up complicating the game. And of course, if you need to have the weapon mastery to do a special maneuver, then that means that if you don't have the weapon mastery, you can't do that maneuver, even if in theory it's something that anyone should be able to attempt, And there have been lots of games, including other editions of D&D, that had something like weapon mastery, which is different, by the way, from weapon proficiency, right? Like weapon proficiency is, okay, you're a fighter class or whatever, and in some versions of D&D you didn't even have to be that. You get a certain number of preferred weapon slots, and with those you get an extra +1 to hit or something like that, or +1 to hit and +2 to damage or whatever. Right? That's not in itself any kind of a problem, especially because it applies to anyway. You just pick the weapon and that's what you get. But weapon mastery rules, from how they described it, sounds like basically with each type of weapon you have some special technique that you can do that is a special kind of action that does something different for each one, And that is something that a lot of systems have tried to do as a way to make combat more interesting. But it's actually a really bad approach. First off, because as I mentioned, you have that problem that if you have the technique, you can do that. If you have the weapon master, you can do this special technique, which means that other people couldn't possibly do it, even if because it's not supposed to be magic, right? Like in theory, anyone should be able to try to do almost any of the techniques, right? It doesn't make a lot of sense that it shouldn't be possible, and the necessity to go into the meta level of the game instead of the world level of the game, so that you can say, well, for reasons, only people who have this ability can do this physical technique that anyone should at least be able to attempt, right? It'd be another thing if you could do something better, like this is that it's a very big problem, and it's not a good way to handle the supposed lack of coolness of fighters, right? There's other ways to do it, and obviously in my games, because I like to keep things simpler, what I did, as I mentioned in my previous video, if you watch my previous video on the second video I've done on Design Notes of Baptism of Fire, where I talk about classes, I point out that the fighters are really the best at fighting in such a big way that in itself is the reward, right? That they're going to be way more confident. They're going to have more attacks per level. They do much more damage per level. They have a variety of bonuses. They're better at wearing armor than other classes. All kinds of stuff, right? Which doesn't mean that other classes can't fight, and it doesn't mean that other classes can't wear armor, right? So this is something that fixes it. But if what you want is fancy footwork or special maneuvers, there's a way to do that too, and it isn't a long list of individual techniques you have to purchase with points or something like that. Points being whether it's like, a point buy system, or whether it's, okay, at every level you get to pick one or two more techniques from this list of whatever, 78 techniques or whatever they're going to do. The right way to do this is how it's done in Dungeon Crawl Classics, where what you have, if you want to do something like this, you can have an individual technique that a fighter class gets, an individual special ability, let's say, a fighter class gets, which is that they can do regular attacks, and then they can attempt to do some kind of special maneuver at the same time as their attack. And that means that because the problem is if you only use the special thing, then means you're sacrificing the chance of doing normal damage for the chance of doing something fancy that is more likely to fail or whatever, right? But if you have that combined, which is why what they did with the fighter in DCC was absolutely perfect, it means that you could hit with the regular attack and attempt the special technique. The special technique might fail or it might succeed, and that it means that you don't have to have a list of special techniques. The fighter can just do anything that seems reasonable in the context of the action that he's taking, right? Like, so if he's trying to do an attack with one guy and throw his shield at another guy as a special action, Captain America style or whatever, then he rolls on the technique die, let's call it, I think it's called the action die in DCC, if I'm remembering correctly. Or no, the deed die. And if he succeeds at the deed, then he hits the guy he's attacking and he throws the shield into some other guy's face, right? Or whatever. And so this means that instead of fighters having to buy their way through a selection of special moves, some of which are going to be much better than others, which will then force them to get the weapon that associates with that particular move, they just have a base chance of doing any kind of special maneuver that other people could potentially do, but they couldn't do it as a bonus action. That's the way that you do something like this. So in short, what they've done with onednd in terms of rules, which is, significant, is that they have essentially made the game more bloated. It's become, I would dare to say that this edition is going to become dangerously, if not morbidly obese as a rule set. And that is going to actually worsen the quality of gameplay for people, because suddenly they're going to have to be thinking much more about optimization than you did in 5th edition. That's the main problem. And of course, as a last note, they also, they had announced a while back that they were going to make Greyhawk the default world of the core books. And I did a video about that earlier on, so you can check that out. They have now released the Greyhawk map, and it's notable that they have changed some names and some places. Greyhawk people probably know more about this than I do. The Greyhawk Grognard, I'm sure, will do a video about this. But essentially, it seems as though they've erased some problematic areas altogether, and they've changed some names. There's some weird stuff in there. So this is not Gary Gygax's Greyhawk, and that was obvious. That was what I warned people in that video. I said, if you're a Greyhawk fan, do not cheer for this, because they're going to ruin Greyhawk. That's all they ever do with any of the classic settings, is they destroy them. They make them completely a mockery of what they were meant to be. They did it with Ravenloft, they did it with Spelljammer, they did it with Dragonlance, and now they're going to do it to Greyhawk. So I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news in those respects, but that's the situation, essentially. And I guess that's everything for today. If you like this video, please hit the like button. Share this video anywhere you think people will find it interesting, or where they might get pissed off by it. And subscribe if you haven't subscribed. And if you want to support me, well, you can always send a super thanks or whatever. Or if you prefer, you can pick up my products. If you hit the more button on the description of this video, you'll see an expanded list of all of my products, links to all my products. And if you want something that's going to be better than onednd, be sure to check out Baptism of Fire or any of my many other RPGs. Or heck, if you like space opera, Star Adventure. It's a thin little book, but it's got everything you need for an OSR rule set for space opera play. So be sure to check those out. And thank you again, everyone. Currently smoking. This is Nira Poker plus Argento Roots.